In a small town, surrounded by fields and rivers, there lived a farmer and his wife. They had a simple life, but they were content. The farmer woke up early every day, his boots sinking into the soft earth as he worked the land. He had a small plot of land, just enough to grow vegetables and feed his animals. Every evening, after the day's work was done, he would sit with his wife by their modest fire, enjoying the quiet moments of life. The farmer's wife was known for her gentle nature. She was not only beautiful, but also wise. She had a quiet strength that balanced her husband's hard-working spirit. Together, they made a perfect pair. While the farmer took care of the fields, she would tend to the house, making sure it was always neat and welcoming. Her laughter filled their little home, and her kind heart made everyone in the village feel at ease. Their neighbors often envied them. Despite their lack of wealth, they were happy and satisfied with the simple joys they found in each other and their work. The farmer loved his wife deeply and appreciated everything she did for him. He never thought much about wealth or fame, for he had something more precious: love, loyalty, and peace. Not far from the farmer's simple home, in a grand mansion surrounded by tall fences and beautiful gardens, lived the businessman. His wealth was unmatched in the town. He owned several shops, large houses, and many pieces of land. He wore fine clothes, and his house was filled with expensive furniture and decorations. But despite his wealth, he was not a happy man. His life was filled with envy and longing. The businessman had a wife who was beautiful but cold. She didn't care about him the way the farmer's wife cared for her husband. Their home was filled with silence, with no laughter or warmth. She was always unhappy, and the businessman could never understand why. Though he had all the money in the world, he could not buy the love and happiness he desired. One day, as he walked around his grand estate, he thought about the farmer and his wife. The businessman had seen how happy they were. He noticed how the farmer's wife cared for him with such kindness and attention, and it made him feel bitter. Why should someone like the farmer have such a clever and kind wife, he thought. I have everything else, but I lack the one thing that truly matters: love. His mind began to turn, and an idea began to form. He became determined to have the farmer's wife for himself, believing that his wealth would make him more deserving of her. After all, he reasoned, the farmer was just a simple man, and someone with his money and status should be with a woman like her. The businessman could not shake his thoughts. He decided to visit the farmer. He thought that if he could convince the farmer to swap wives, everything would be perfect. The businessman imagined how much better his life would be with a clever and loving woman like the farmer's wife. He also thought that the farmer would be much happier with his own cold wife, who would be better suited to his simple nature. One morning, the businessman made his way to the farmer's home. The farmer was in the fields when the businessman arrived. He walked into the small cottage and saw the farmer's wife sitting by the fire. She smiled warmly at him, offering him a seat. "Good morning," she said kindly. "How can I help you today?" The businessman smiled, but quickly got to the point. "I've been thinking," he said. "I believe it would be better for both of us if we exchanged wives. You would be happier with my wife, and I would be better suited to yours." The farmer's wife was shocked by the proposal. She couldn't understand why anyone would think such a thing, but she remained calm. "Why would we do such a thing?" she asked, her voice steady. The businessman explained that he thought the farmer's simple ways would be better suited to his cold wife, and that the farmer deserved more than the life he had with his kind and clever wife. "You see," he said, "I believe your wife would be much better off with someone like me. I can offer her everything: wealth, luxury, and a life of ease. Don't you think she deserves that?" The farmer's wife could hardly believe what she was hearing. She glanced outside, where she could see her husband working hard in the field. She knew how much he loved her, and she could not imagine living without him. The businessman's words were harsh and cruel, and she felt a deep sadness in her heart. But she kept her calm and answered softly, "I do not believe that wealth can replace love. My husband and I have a life full of love and respect. That is worth more than anything money can buy." But the businessman was not ready to give up. He told the farmer's wife that he would go to the town's wise judge to settle the matter. "I will prove that I am more deserving of your wife," he declared. "We will see who the judge says is worthy." The farmer's wife turned to her husband that evening and told him about the businessman's proposal. The farmer was deeply upset by the idea. "How could anyone suggest such a thing?" he said, his voice filled with hurt. "I don't understand why he would want to take you from me. You are my heart." His wife, seeing his distress, reassured him. "Don't worry, my love. You are a good man. You are honest and kind, and that is what matters. We will face this together." The next morning, the farmer and his wife went to the judge, a wise man known for his fairness and understanding. The businessman was already there, waiting for them. He had a smug look on his face, convinced that his wealth would win him the judge's favor. The judge greeted them and listened carefully as the businessman explained his proposal. "I believe that I am more deserving of the farmer's wife," he said. "I offer her everything: riches, luxury, a life of ease. I think it's only fair that she should be with someone like me." The judge nodded thoughtfully. I will ask each of you 2 questions, he said. If you can answer them, I will make my decision based on your responses. The first question the judge asked was, how many grains of sand are there on the riverbank? The farmer thought for a moment, then smiled. He took out a small basket of beans and poured them into the ground, saying, the answer is here. Count if you wish. The judge smiled, impressed by the farmer's answer, but the businessman was not satisfied. That's not a proper answer, he said angrily. He must be getting help. The judge raised his hand to calm him. Let us move on to the second question, he said. Where does the sky meet the earth? The farmer thought again. He picked up a small stick from the ground and planted it firmly in the earth. Here, he said, this is where they meet. The businessman was furious, convinced that the farmer had cheated. He shouted, "This is not fair. He has had help." The judge smiled and said, "The farmer's answers show that he is wise in his own way. His love for his wife is clear, and he has shown his worth." The businessman, still angry, stormed out of the courtroom, but he was no longer sure of his plan. He realized that wealth and power could not buy love or happiness. As he left the judge's chambers, he wondered what his life would be like if he had the same love the farmer had. The farmer and his wife returned home, their hearts filled with relief. They knew that no matter what, they had something far more valuable than wealth: each other. After the judge had made his decision, the businessman left in anger, but something in his mind had changed. For the first time, he truly understood that money could not replace the love the farmer shared with his wife. His wealth, his fine clothes, and his many possessions had all felt like the greatest things in life. But he now realized that they did not bring him the happiness he saw in the farmer's humble life. As the farmer and his wife settled back into their home, they felt a deep sense of peace. The farmer held his wife's hand, grateful for her unwavering support and love. "I don't know what I would do without you," he said softly. "I will always be by your side," she replied, her smile brightening the room. "We are enough for each other. Our life is simple, but it is full of love." But while the businessman had left in anger, he was not ready to give up. He was still determined to get what he wanted. He began to think of another way to prove that he was more deserving of the farmer's wife. His mind, always scheming, soon came up with a plan. He decided to invite both the farmer and his wife over for a meal at his mansion. He would host them in his grand dining room, showing them all that he had. The businessman believed that the sight of his wealth would make the farmer's wife want to live with him. But what the businessman did not know was that the farmer's wife, with her sharp mind, was already one step ahead. The businessman sent a messenger to the farmer's house with an invitation. "Come to my home for dinner," the message read. "I will make sure you have a meal fit for royalty. You will see for yourselves how much better life could be with me." The farmer was confused, but agreed, wanting to avoid any further conflict. He trusted his wife and knew that whatever happened, they could face it together. "We should go," he said. "But remember, no matter what we see, we have each other. That is all we need." His wife nodded, reassuring him. "Don't worry, my love. I know what I'm doing." The next evening, they both dressed in their best clothes, though they still looked simple compared to the grand attire of the businessman. They made their way to his mansion, their hearts full of curiosity and caution. As they arrived at the mansion, the businessman greeted them with a fake smile. He led them inside, where the walls were lined with expensive paintings, and the floors gleamed with polished wood. Everything about the house screamed wealth, but there was an emptiness to it, a coldness that the farmer and his wife could feel as soon as they stepped inside. The businessmen led them to the grand dining room, where a large table was set with plates of food. It looked beautiful, but the farmer's wife noticed something odd. The food seemed too perfect, as though it was all for show, not for real enjoyment. "Please sit," the businessman said, gesturing toward the table. "Tonight, you will see the life I can offer. No one can compare to what I have." The farmer and his wife sat down at the table, exchanging a glance. They had both already realized that wealth was not what mattered most. The businessman smiled as the servants brought out the first course, a soup that smelled strongly of spices. The farmer took a spoonful and immediately made a face. The soup was far too salty, and it was clear that the chef had made a mistake. "Is everything to your liking?" the businessman asked with a grin, clearly expecting compliments. The farmer's wife, ever polite but clever, took a spoonful as well. She too frowned, but instead of complaining, she smiled at the businessman. "It's different," she said carefully, "but we appreciate the effort." Next came a meat dish, which was tough and overcooked. The vegetables were burnt, and the bread was dry. The meal was a disaster, and yet the businessman seemed to take pride in it, oblivious to how unpleasant it was. The farmer, trying to be polite, chewed through the dry meat and forced a smile. His wife, on the other hand, remained calm, but could not help feeling that the meal reflected the businessman's life, glittering on the outside, but hollow on the inside. "I can tell you've worked hard to prepare this," she said, not wanting to offend, but her words carried a subtle hint of sarcasm that went unnoticed by the businessman. Finally, dessert arrived, a collection of overly sweet pastries that had been poorly baked. The farmer took a small bite, and his face showed his struggle to keep from grimacing. The businessman watched eagerly, waiting for praise. "Thank you," the farmer said politely, though he could hardly finish his food. "You have truly gone all out." The businessman smiled, feeling proud of his meal. "I told you, no one can compare to my wealth and resources. I can give you everything you could ever want." The farmer's wife looked at her husband, then stood up slowly, her calm demeanor never faltering. "This has been an interesting evening," she said with a soft laugh. "But it's clear to me that wealth alone cannot create happiness." The businessman's face turned red with frustration. "What do you mean?" he demanded. "I've given you everything I can offer." The farmer's wife looked him in the eye and spoke gently but firmly. "You have shown us that money does not buy true joy. A meal may look beautiful, but if it is not prepared with care and love, it means nothing. A house may be grand, but if it is filled with nothing but empty luxury, it feels cold." The businessman was speechless. He had no words to argue with her wisdom. After the meal, the farmer and his wife excused themselves and left the mansion. As they walked out into the cool evening air, the farmer looked at his wife with admiration. "You were brilliant," he said softly. "You handled everything with such grace." His wife smiled at him, her heart full of love. "It is not wealth that matters," she said. "It is the love we share. That is what makes life rich." The businessman, sitting alone in his grand dining room, began to realize something he had never understood before. He had all the wealth in the world, but he had no love, no warmth, and no happiness. The farmer, on the other hand, lived a simple life, but his heart was full. In that moment, the businessman understood that true happiness did not come from what you owned. It came from the love you gave and received. He had spent his life chasing the wrong things. The next day, the businessman went to the farmer's house. He stood outside, unsure of what to say. When the farmer saw him, he smiled and waved. "I wanted to apologize," the businessman said, his voice full of humility. "I thought I could buy happiness, but I now see that I was wrong. You and your wife have something far more valuable than anything I could offer." The farmer nodded. "We have love, and that is all we need." From that day on, the businessman returned to his life, but he was a changed man. Though he still had his wealth, he knew that money could not buy true happiness. He learned to value love and contentment over material wealth. The farmer and his wife continued their simple, happy life, surrounded by love and peace. They had everything they needed, and they were content. The businessman, though still wealthy, was no longer blinded by his desire for more. He learned to appreciate the simple things in life, and that was enough. And so, the story of the honest farmer, his clever wife, and the businessman who learned the true meaning of happiness came to an end, reminding us all that love, kindness, and simplicity are the greatest treasures of all.